Hello, today is Friday, April 10th. Welcome to episode 580 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. I'm NSI Advisory Board member Lester Munson. I'm joined today by Senior Fellow Morgan Vigna and Fellows Algene Sajari and Marc Raimondi. Folks, we're going to talk about the South China Sea today and U.S.-China relations. This has not been like a front page news story, but China is building yet another man-made island in the South China Sea. It is called Antelope Reef. It is part of the Paracels, which, as everyone knows, is one of the island chains in the South China Sea, along with the Spratly Islands. This is the area south of China, south of Taiwan. It is east of Vietnam and west of the Philippines, north of Indonesia. International law says it is not China's territory. China disagrees, and it keeps building these artificial islands in the South China Sea, which it is using for military purposes. It is putting its Coast Guard, its Navy, other military assets there and military-like assets there. There are runways, there are buildings. They're using it to refuel ships and that kind of thing. It is a real threat to particularly Taiwan, but also other neighbors in the region. Is something that's been going on for 13 years, but now Antelope Reef is new as of the last couple of months. Of course, the United States is distracted by Venezuela, Iran of late. We have not heard a lot from the Trump administration about this. Marc, I want to go to you first here. I know you have some thoughts about this overall situation. Put it in context for us, please.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. Look, Beijing likes to move when Washington's distracted. That's what it looks like here. Some of my colleagues will probably get more into that, but bottom line is we're distracted, like you said, with the Middle East, with Venezuela, some domestic issues at home. So thus the island building restarts. What we're seeing right now with this new base construction is not an isolated incident. It's part of Beijing's long, deliberate strategy to change the makeup of the region. Over the past decade plus, they've systematically transformed the South China Sea. Around 2013, as we know, they launched a massive dredging campaign, literally turning submerged reefs into artificial islands across the Spratlys. These aren't small, these are huge. These are thousands of acres of new land. Beijing told the world that these were civilian projects, fishing support, weather stations, benign infrastructure. But almost immediately, we saw that they lied. They militarized the islands. They put long runways, hardened aircraft shelters, radar arrays, anti-ship and aircraft missiles. In effect, they created a network of what essentially is unsinkable aircraft carriers across one of the most strategically important waterways on the planet. Now, there's a lot. The Strait of Hormuz is in the press right now. It's everywhere. Reopen it. It's important to the global economy. Let's put it in perspective. About 10 to 11% of global trade volume transits the Strait of Hormuz, but about 20 to 30% annually goes through the South China Sea, much, much more. So, you could say, well, Strait of Hormuz is important because of the oil. It's true. 20% of global oil transits Strait of Hormuz, but around 30% of the global seaborne oil trade actually goes across the South China Sea. So it's important to note, it isn't just about territory. It's about control of the sea lanes, control of airspace, ultimately the ability to project power across the entire region. Also, the ability to control aspects of the global supply chains. We've seen China not hesitate to weaponize their ability to disrupt or hold hostage the global supply chains. And that ties directly to Taiwan. If you look at the map, these outposts form a broader effort, dominate the first island chains, are moving, increasingly pushing into the second. By building and militarizing these positions, they're creating the infrastructure they'd need for a Taiwan invasion, forward basing, surveillance, logistics, and the ability to really complicate any U.S. or allied efforts to come to Taiwan's aid. So it isn't just opportunistic, it's cumulative. They have a plan, they're executing on it. Every reef, every runway, each radar system adds another layer to a strategy designed to shift the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. So it's not about the one island in the Wall Street Journal article. It's bigger than that. China's figured out how to turn these incremental illegal gains into permanent strategic advantage, and so far the world hasn't found any way to stop them.
Algene, I want to go to you next here, and let me tee it up for you. 10 years ago, the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague, an institution we all hold dear, to be sure, issued a decision that basically the South China Sea is not Chinese territory to do with whatever they wish. It is an international waterway. They can't just be building these man-made islands and using it for military purposes. International law has spoken. How much does that matter right now?
Well, I think it doesn't matter very much because not many people, even in the West, are paying attention to international law. And I agree with Marc that, China definitely sees the U.S. and others as distracted with Iran, et cetera. But I also think it's basically asserting itself now by building this new structure because it's really clear that in 2026, we're in a new age of aggressive economic imperialism where the United States and many others are sort of changing the international law by setting new precedents, going back to the old world order, in which all of the conventions that were signed in the wake of World War II no longer really matter. So we're not really in a rules-based system of international cooperation that we were in, prior to this current decade. So I think that, we're kind of failing the test ourselves on whether or not we're adhering to these international laws. This year, the U.S. has demonstrated that Western powers are willing to ignore those norms. We saw their aggression in Venezuela, the U.S. aggression in Venezuela and Cuba, Iran, and certainly the threats to take over Greenland, or as Trump called it, the big poorly run piece of ice. And, these aggressions make loud and clear that we're in a new age, one that harkens back to that time before these laws were even, put into place. Much less are we eager at all to adhere to those norms. So China is very brazen and never to be outdone. So I think they've been re-emboldened. And so this new post is just, it's a further assertion of its claims to the South China Sea. And we're going to probably, as Marc said, we're going to see more. It's a long game that they're playing. But the question is really, what is anybody going to do about it?
Morgan, sorry, Algene. Morgan, what are we going to do about it? Why don't you answer Algene's question? And further, let me give you two questions. What do you think of what Algene just said? And what about this apparent softening from the Trump administration on all things China over the last year or so? What say you?
So first off, at this point in time, international law is a little overrated. I think it's demonstrated to be completely feckless. Yes, we have, international norms and laws, but I think we've demonstrated that no one's actually really taking them seriously or following them at this point. And so the enforcement of it is kind of a joke. Like it's not very, PC to say, but like I have a really hard time in this day and age taking international courts seriously. Obviously, the United States does not, neither does China. These are the two world's largest powers. So here we are. In addition to that, Les, look, when you ask about the president's softening towards China, it does cause concern. It causes concern, particularly given sort of where we are militarily. China is being emboldened, as Marc and Algene have stated, and we see that in the South China Sea. We see Vietnam and the Philippines also establish, their own bases on these islands as well, and so. I think it's interesting because in this context of the world in which we live in, we have this ongoing war in the Middle East right now, and China is building up its own little, what do we want to call it? Area of influence, sphere of influence within the South China Sea.
A watery Maginot Line.
There we go. Or I liked Marc's unsinkable. What was it, Marc? The unsinkable. Help me out here.
Aircraft carriers.
Yeah, that's the one.
That was termed in World War II when we were looking at invading Taiwan after Normandy, and it was turned down. Anyway, but that's an old term.
So anyway, I mean, I think in the context of the Middle East, we're looking at this Chinese buildup, and this is all in the context of a potential future invasion of Taiwan, right? And when I think about our own military and the fact that we are depleting our munitions and assets at such a sharp clip, like that causes me concern, right? The fact that we were not prepared for drone warfare in the Middle East, when clearly Iran has been using Shaheds and sharing that technology with Ukraine in the Middle East. I mean, yes, the United States is perhaps one of the most innovative countries on this planet, right? But at the same time, we are woefully underprepared for a conflict in the Indo-Pacific. And the fact that China is moving forward with these types of aggressive actions, I think only underscores the need for us to really get with the program. Oh, and by the way, shipbuilding, we've only been I give the Trump administration a lot of credit for putting massive investment within shipbuilding. That's only been going on now for less than a year. So we truly need to make these investments. I'm excited about a $1.5 trillion budget, but a defense budget, we'll see if it gets passed or how that happens. So
it's a budget request, not a budget.
Correct. Exactly, Wes. Congress does have a role to play.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
Let me make a modification of Algene's point, if I may, which is, yes, there's an international law question here. The Chinese have been ignoring international law going back to 2013, at least on this issue. When it was the Obama administration openly said, we love international law. We want to abide by it. Notably, they did not do that with Libya. The Libya question. They reserved the right to disagree with international law over Libya, but they gave a bunch of rhetorical support to it. So did the Biden administration. None of that mattered. A good part of the reason we have the Trump administration now, which has openly expressed disdain for international law in many of these aspects, is because it doesn't work very well at all. And it certainly is not helping U.S. interests at this point. Meanwhile, we have an administration that is fine to kind of go around international law, but they're not addressing the question of what China is doing that hurts U.S. interests in this region in particular. Why is the Trump administration kind of giving China a pass on this? I don't totally understand this, unless it is to kind of deal with the issue of Venezuela and Iran and kind of pull them out of the Chinese sphere, the China-Russia sphere of antagonism to the West. If so, this kind of makes some sense. Park China as an issue while you deal with these other things that are maybe a little bit easier to handle, and then kind of turn to the China issue when you have a strengthened hand. That does make some strategic sense. I don't know if that is in fact the administration strategy, because they won't talk about it. Their strategic documents are more like messaging things that are trying to kind of tee up these options for the president, rather than actually explaining to the American people what the U.S. geostrategic strategy is. So, all right, folks. Not much of a fun Friday, but it is a Friday. What, Morgan? What do you have to say?
Okay, well, how's this? So when I wasn't answering your question, I was actually trying to think of what to say. So for what it's worth, I do think Trump being soft on China, particularly in recent months. Look, I think he's trying to find a pathway forward, particularly on the economic front with them. We were supposed to see this major summit happen between Trump and Xi at the end of March. That didn't happen. It's being rescheduled for May. So I think, honestly, we should do another episode in leading up to that summit to actually try to see, okay, what is actually being done here? What are they planning for? What are the outcomes of this meeting going to be? So I think it's too early to actually for us to actually comment on what on sort of the administration's stance on China until we actually see something come out of those meetings.
Yeah, but if I may just add to what Morgan just said, because I think it's really important.
what we have seen in the last year is a departure from what we saw in the previous Trump administration, where they were hardline on China. There are some, if you read the news, there's very likely some personnel changes coming up where we might see some of the China doves moved on, and hopefully that will allow some of the China hawks to regain their footing.
Oh, who are you talking about, Marc?
I'll refer you to the articles about what the administration is looking at from changes, but I think it's pretty evident that we've seen some moves with commerce and so forth that might be relooked if there are some personnel changes.
Yeah. See, Marc, I just want to acknowledge that Marc said that what I have to say is important. So
what you have to say is
everything
important.
You say is important.
Everything. We are empowering everyone today. We are platforming all. We want all voices to be heard, and we want to find the fault lines between what we have to say. Let me just make the point. We do this 3 times a week. We're going to talk about it now. We're going to talk about it next week. We're going to talk about it prematurely. We're going to talk about it too late. We're going to talk about it a lot because that's what we do here. All right, that's a wrap. Thanks as always to Kelly Crowley, Grace Trice, Claude Jennings, the NSI staff for the help in producing today's episode. Join us on Monday, April 13th for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and policy debate shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.